boy, Donald Trump is determined to plunge the US, Canada, Mexico into economic crisis, and with the US in particular, the whole world. And ours is an age where so much turmoil has been driven by economic insecurity. So I'm afraid, guys, this could have drastic consequences, as if you're not already, I would say, pretty exhausted by the drama and turmoil of the last few years. But above all else, and we'll get to this point, this exposes the need to overturn a totally broken economic model that long predates Trump. He's a symptom of it, even though he is, of course, whacking his foot on the accelerators. I want to start with Canada. Like Mexico and China, Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on Canada, which serve in practice as a tax. The company coughs up, but then in practice passes it on to the consumer as a price increase. Now, superficially, Trump has imposed 25% tariffs on Canada, as well as in Mexico and China, to stop the flow of the drug fentanyl across its borders. That's what he says anyway. Now, as Canada's outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau notes, this is really just a desperate pretext. Leaving aside overdose deaths from fentanyl actually falling, helped by actually good approaches, such as expanding treatment services, and that less than 1% of fentanyl intercepted arriving in the US actually comes from Canada. Just forget all that. This is just coming up with a legal pretext for the president to impose tariffs because Donald Trump wants to annex Canada and turn it into the 51st state of the United States. It sounds deranged, and many have obviously concluded that Trump constantly talking about turning Canada into the 51st state is just a ruse. He doesn't really mean it. Of course he's wacky. Come on, he's trolling us. It's a negotiating ploy. Oh, the deal, everyone. No, he really means it. This is what Trudeau himself said.
I think in terms of what he wants, and I heard he talked about banking again this morning in a tweet, which doesn't make any sense because American banks, there's about 16 American banks currently active in Canada holding about $113 billion worth of assets in this country. So the American banks are alive and well and prospering in Canada. It's an example of not really being able to see what it is that he wants, because even the excuse that he's giving for these Paris tariffs today of fentanyl is completely bogus, completely unjustified, completely false. So we actually have to fold back on the one thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us, is the second half of his thought.
I mean, I'm not a Trudeau fan, but the boy's right. The boy's right. I'm significantly younger than him, but anyway, whatever. Indeed, the Canadian foreign minister also said this.
Like, how seriously do you take the talk of President Trump speaking of Canada as the 51st state?
Very seriously. This is not a joke anymore. This is not something we laugh at. This is actually based on the conversations we've had, and I've had also with many of the Trump administration officials. Because when they talk to us, it is not only about our border and the fentanyl issue and the so-called national security crisis at the northern border, which is clearly not the case, but they've put everything on the table: our military cooperation, security alliances, water, etc. So they've been threatening us of different things, and now we wanted to make sure that the Canadian public and the world was clearly informed of what's going on.
I mean, what do you even say? They mean it. They want Canada. According to the polling, 90% of Canadians oppose becoming the 51st state. A slight hiccup there for Trump's plans, while only 25% of Americans support Canada joining their union. That's nonetheless a hardcore group of people in America who are clearly supportive of aggressive expansionism. What's truly disturbing is that even though Trump says Canada won't be taken using military force, you know, that they won't be annexed militarily, 62% of Canadians don't trust him on that. So nearly 2/3 of Canadians are actually toying with the prospect of a potential invasion by the United States and thus all-out war. What a time to be alive. Now, in normal times, you just rule that out and go, obviously there's not going to be a war. I don't know. I wouldn't rule it out. What, in the world in which we now live, would you definitely 100% rule out a war between the US and Canada in the next 4 years? I wouldn't, actually. I think it's unlikely, but I wouldn't rule it out. And that just shows the world we're now in. Now, what Trump certainly has achieved is a massive turnaround in Canadian politics. Before Trudeau announced his resignation, his Liberal Party was set to be obliterated in the coming election at the hands of the opposition Conservatives, who were set to win a whopping big majority. There's been a massive turnaround, and the Liberals now look like they're in with a shot. I mean, I would personally vote for the New Democratic Party, who alas have been further squeezed. Nonetheless, this would be a objectively pretty hilarious outcome. Now, it gets even more disturbing because Trump is clearly dead set on annexing Greenland too. Greenland's part of Denmark, a EU state. Now, here he is threatening to take Greenland. Listening to him in his State of the Union address.
I also have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland. We strongly support your right to determine your own future. And if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
We're going to get it one way or the other. Not a subtle threat there, I would say. And this is what we're now sort of contemplating, the leader of the United States genuinely discussing seizing other Western states. It's quite an interesting development, isn't it, in terms of world history? What is the impact of Trump's unhinged behaviour? Let's listen to what he also said in his State of the Union address last night.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh.
A little disturbance, he says. Well, that disturbance won't be paid by the likes of him, not monetarily, not financially anyway, maybe electorally. According to the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, which runs a model estimating economic growth called GDP Now, US growth in the first quarter of the year is now set to be minus 2.8%, down from an estimate of plus 2.3% just last week. A month ago, that model showed around 4%. That means the US in the first quarter, the US economy, is contracting at the fastest pace since the pandemic half a decade ago. For those who don't know, there's lots of these models around, but the Atlanta Fed is seen as the most reliable. Now, there's lots of there's lots of data pointing in this direction. US consumer confidence is now down to an 8-month low. Retail sales have had their biggest drop in nearly 2 years. According to the Tax Foundation think tank, even before retaliation, tariffs will shrink the US economy by nearly 0.3% and after tax incomes by 0.7 on average. Now, no, Joe Biden was partly sunk because of rising prices hitting struggling Americans. So Trump deliberately hiking prices seems an interesting choice. Now, I'm guessing this guy is not exactly a dedicated student of the history of his own nation, but it is worth recalling the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. That was passed by Republican politicians in Congress. As the official US Senate website records, it was on June the 13th, 1930, that the Senate passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, among the most catastrophic acts in congressional history. Noting economists at the time wrote letters warning of the consequences, the website adds, as the economists predicted, the high tariff proved to be a disaster. Even before its enactment, US trading partners began retaliating by raising their tariff rates, which froze international trade. Now, last time in the 1930s, when we had this behavior, we ended up in a global war. Look, I get it. There's clearly big differences today. I mean, back then there was economic turmoil, the rise of fascism, growing conflict. Well, that's unfortunate. Anyway, the Chinese government has issued a statement which rather ominously ends with, if war is what the US wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we're ready to fight till the end. Great, lovely, normal stuff there. I mean, it is worth bearing in mind that Trump's pivot towards Russia may be partly understood as an attempt to peel Russia away from China on the grounds that the US judges an ascendant China to be the preeminent threat. And there are those who think a war with China at some point is inevitable, which would be a world war. Now, look, the rise of Donald Trump and other far-right movements has everything to do with an economic model that's broken. As the brilliant economics professor Mariana Mazzucato notes in an article for Foreign Affairs, declining support for the Democratic Party among working-class voters reflects a deep disenchantment with an economic system that, under administrations led by presidents of both parties, has concentrated wealth at the very top, enabled the growth of the financial sector at the expense of the rest of the economy, trapped people in cycles of debt, and deprioritized the well-being of millions of Americans. She further notes the disconnect between growth and material benefit for the working class is the product of decades of US policy. For the last half century, Democrats have supported measures that increase the influence of the financial sector in the US economy, weakened worker bargaining power, and suppressed wages. Finally, she concludes, to build an economy that works for all, public investment is critical. Private investment in domestic production will not happen without government investment, and businesses left to their own devices will not necessarily invest in ways that benefit working people. Amen. In short, we need a new economic model. This one's rubbish. It's not working. Donald Trump is a symptom of a broken economic model and an accelerant. It works very well for people like him, not so much for everybody else. Now, what he's actually doing will only increase the pain suffered by not just Americans and indeed Canadians, Mexicans, Chinese citizens, but also the world. And we've already seen the turmoil that economic pain and insecurity has created and is creating. Guys, we either build a new economic order, or I'm afraid this world is going to hell. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts in your comments. Do help us as we expand our operations to challenge a very broken, terrible media ecosystem, which is rigged in favour of the very elites we're now talking about. At patreon.com/OwenJones84, you're making all this possible, and we'll keep on expanding, unlike the American economy. Leave your thoughts, comments, like and subscribe because it's good for the algorithm, and we kind of want people to kind of watch the content we're making here, guys. But I'll see you next time. Listen to us on podcast as well.